everyone. This is Giulio Coraggio, location head at DLA Piper in Italy of the Italian Intellectual Property and Technology Department. Today, I'm happy to have as our guest Michael Fluhr. Michael is a colleague of mine. He's a partner specialized in blockchain, Web3 litigation at our San Francisco office. Michael, welcome and thanks for accepting my invite.
Giulio, thank you so much for having me.
Michael, obviously, we're going to discuss with you about Web3. There was a massive buzz around NFTs and the metaverse up to, I would say, around a year ago. And then all of a sudden, all this interest kind of disappeared or, in a way, slowed down. What do you think is the reason of this situation, and how do you think the situation will evolve? Are there legal issues behind this strange situation at the moment?
So the first thing I'll say is I try to not get too far outside of my lane, which is a lawyer. And so, if you ask me, what is the cause of the inflation and then decline in the NFT market, the first thing I would say is that's not really my area. That being said, I'm pretty immersed in the blockchain space generally. I've done a ton of work in and with the NFT industry. And so, part of what it seemed to me is a sort of a natural interest, excitement around a new technology, which, as in many technologies, encourages a little bit of extra investment, interest, hype, and that's not always sustained. So I think what we're seeing is maybe, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, sort of a natural evolution of a new technology. There's a lot of interest, a lot of hype, maybe that isn't sustained, and now we have kind of, settled on a more, I'd say, equilibrium in terms of, interest and supply and demand in the NFT space.
Yeah.
Before we get to the legal, sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Someone expects a new hype with the launch of some products that are expected for the beginning of next year. That would be interesting. But we've seen some major companies in the tech space that even changed their name to refer to the metaverse. And then in the last public announcements of their budgets, they don't even refer to the metaverse anymore. So yeah, it is a big question. Maybe technology needs to advance in order to be more interactive. In terms of legal challenges, I mean, it seemed that up to a year ago, everyone was trying to protect anything in the metaverse, any sort of NFT, or do you see the same trend at the moment? Or, I mean, again, there is a lack of interest, so even a lack of disputes in the space.
Yeah, so there are a few different legal aspects of what we're seeing in the NFT space. So first, along with this kind of decline, maybe in interest, you have a lot of NFT holders that we're starting to see come forward and say, hey, we thought the project was going to do this and this and this. There were a lot of projects out there that maybe weren't as thoughtful and as careful about what they said and what they promised as they could have been. And we're starting to see holders come forward and say, we thought an NFT was going to deliver this. We're not seeing, what we think was marketed. And we haven't seen too many challenges from NFT holders on a legal front yet, but we're starting to see the rumblings and what could form the basis of legal challenges. So that's one area. I'll pause there, and I'm curious if you're seeing the same thing on the continent.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, in the first period of the hype of NFTs, NFTs were more collectibles, and now we've seen a shift to what is called an utility token, so an NFT that has some functionalities. And then, as you said, with the lack of interest in the market for NFTs, some of the expectations, some of the commitments that were taken by the issuers were not met anymore. And so, but that is a contract. Maybe some people didn't really understand that the NFT is embeds a smart contract with the legal obligations. Yeah, so it is tricky. Michael.
And just before we move on, there is one other very important legal issue concerning NFTs that we're seeing here that I'm pretty sure you're not seeing over there, which is this. As you're probably aware, the question of whether and when blockchain-based assets can constitute securities, the industry for which in the US is highly regulated, is a very important question. For a long time, the focus was on cryptocurrencies, and there wasn't a lot of focus on whether NFTs might constitute securities. There were one or two class actions against some large NFT issuers, but for the most part, we didn't see a lot of either private civil suits or SEC is the regulator here, enforcement actions saying, NFT sellers, you are selling in a security without complying with the proper regulations. All of a sudden, in the past few months, we've seen the SEC come out with a number of settlements against NFT projects. And it looks like they have started to maybe explore more of the argument that NFTs may constitute securities in certain situations. And I'm talking about not NFTs that represent an interest in, stock or a profit-making enterprise, which get closer to the quintessential definition of securities, but NFT collectibles. So this question of who's going to start, if anyone, arguing that NFT collectibles constitute securities and when is a wide open legal question in the US.
No, the same here. Yeah, and we will see, and we have a new regulation on crypto that should apply also to NFTs that is coming next year. We will see how the market is going to react to that. And in the coming year, we see that we will see that some implementation orders will be issued that will shed some additional light, but definitely the scandals around crypto of the last year didn't help to create trust. But I was speaking to a colleague just today, and it's kind of contradiction that we had a few scandals over the last year, but then the value of crypto has increased so much. So it seems there is still interest in crypto, even though there are legal disputes around it.
Yeah, that's been one of the interesting things to watch is the interest in cryptocurrency and the treatment of cryptocurrency and what it's evolved to become. This is getting a little bit outside of a legal discussion, but if you think about the original core proposed use of cryptocurrency, it was as a currency, at least arguably, if you read the Bitcoin white paper. With the advent of blockchains that allowed for programmable smart contracts, you had more of a sense that, well, maybe cryptocurrency could also be used as sort of the toll fee or the gas fee that allowed you to run decentralized applications on a blockchain. And that's another use. And then separate and apart from that, you have the idea of cryptocurrency just as its own asset class, something that people buy and invest in. And so, in terms of what uses are going to shake out as primary or secondary, or, it's still a very interesting time. But for sure, we over here, like you've seen there, these are global markets. We've seen a resurgence in the interest in cryptocurrency.
No, absolutely. We've been working on, just as an Italian office, on more than, I would say, 60 NFT and metaverse projects, but they were all concentrated during the previous yeah, the previous year. Now, I'm sure there will be new trends, but as you mentioned, sometimes we don't fully understand that the blockchain is also a technology that can be used in different fields to automate processes through smart contracts that can remove intermediaries in complex activities. This is a completely separate trend that uses the same underlying technology. You mentioned before you've been working on many projects exploiting blockchain. Can you give us a bit of your understanding on where we are? Is there a competition, for instance, between blockchain and artificial intelligence that is the other buzz of the moment? Or I don't know, the two things are going to be together? What is your view?
Yeah, again, with the caveats that I'm a lawyer and I don't consider myself a technologist, although I love technology, I love learning about it. It's something that I'm good at and like doing. In terms of whether there's any sort of competition or even collaboration between AI and blockchain, it probably depends on exactly, what arena you're talking about. So, for example, if you're talking about where are investing dollars going, where are VC dollars going, sure, I think there probably is a bit of competition between blockchain and AI. Because all of VCs are always looking for the next big place to invest, and AI is very promising. And there remain questions, particularly legal questions in the US about blockchain. So I think there's competition there. In terms of the technology itself, are they competing technologies? Again, with the caveat that I'm not a technologist, I don't think so. I think they're generally doing different things in different spaces. And I can tell you that if anything, we see some collaboration between blockchain and AI. We have a number of clients that are exploring or actually executing in the field of blockchain and AI, where they're using various aspects of blockchain to support their AI efforts.
Yeah, you mentioned before the challenges on the functionalities behind NFTs. Do you see other legal challenges around blockchain that are expected, are coming now or expected to come in the following years?
Yeah, and I'll go from the most present to maybe the most anticipated. Obviously, the most present is the issue of securities regulation. In the US, there are three arguable areas of regulation for blockchain activity. You've got regulation, from the securities regulators, and basically at this point, the US securities regulator, the SEC, has said, we think that practically all cryptocurrencies constitute securities and can't be traded on these platforms and can't be sold in the US absent registration, which we're basically not willing to provide. And that is, I think, the most important battle in the space that's currently being fought out. Right now, it's being fought out at the trial court level, and the industry has disagreed and say no. This is a novel application of this old definition of securities, and it's being fought out in trial courts. Next, it'll be fought out in appellate courts. And I could see this issue being resolved in the Supreme Court. And one thing that's particularly interesting about this issue is at the same time you have the US securities regulators saying all of these assets are securities and they can't be traded, sold, exchanged in the US. You have the commodities regulator, the CFTC, who's basically said many of these assets constitute commodities, and we are willing to regulate them in a somewhat workable way. It's going to be hard for you to create futures markets and swaps markets, but you can do it, and you have to work with us to do it. And then I think on the complete opposite side, you have what I would call maybe the money and banking regulators, who regulate some of the cryptocurrency exchange businesses as money services businesses or money transmitters, businesses that help move money from one person or place to another person or place. And over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, they've proven, in my opinion, very willing to work with certainly cryptocurrency exchanges and custodians and even certain sellers to register as money services businesses and enact compliance and cooperate to make this a workable system of regulation. So, we see this spectrum of approaches in the US that from US regulators that I think is really inconsistent and ultimately not workable. So something's going to have to give. That is absolutely, in my mind, the most pressing, important, unresolved question in the US cryptocurrency space.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have an important decision of the Italian Supreme Court that basically reaches the same conclusion that you just addressed. I do expect that at some point there will be a more consistent approach globally, and maybe the good signal needs to come from the US. If, as you said, that the Supreme Court takes a more, let's say, flexible approach, or gives some identify some gaps in which crypto is not a financial service, that would help, because then maybe the same principles can be expanded globally. Michael, in always referring to blockchain, we're seeing that people are trying to tokenize basically everything. Do you see any challenges apart from what we just mentioned because of this trend? Obviously, if I tokenize something, that becomes something that can be sold to third parties and can acquire a value that might be even quite volatile.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that I see, and this really is at the intersection of the law and the technology, is that what it means to tokenize something isn't clear. And people will use that word tokenize to mean, oh, here's a real world asset, whether it's a car or a baseball card or piece of art or house, and we're going to tokenize it, which certainly connotes some association with a blockchain-based asset, usually an NFT. But the next question is, well, what is that association? There has to be some sort of probably legal connection that says, okay, here is what that association is. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of thought to be had about what that actual connection is. And we saw that this is not new, by the way. So if you go back to the early days of the NFT market, what you saw were people selling NFTs connected to, let's say, an image that would be linked essentially linked in the actual metadata of the NFT. And sellers of NFTs would often say, well, okay, we're going to sell an NFT of this picture. And people bought it, and there was just not a lot of thought about what that actually meant. It took lawyers getting involved and saying, well, if you're selling something associated with a picture, we're probably talking about something that looks like, I don't know, a license, an IP license for that picture. And you started to see the development of standards, and now I think some real industry-wide standards about what it means to maybe tokenize that piece of digital media. I think we're going to see the same thing. I certainly have clients that are doing this now where they're tokenizing real world assets and have explored what it legally means to own an asset, an NFT associated with this asset, and usually connotes some sort of an ownership interest. But that term tokenized in and of itself is neither, I would say, a specific legal or technological term. So I think these projects and the lawyers working with them need to think, what does it actually mean to tokenize a real world asset? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The parallel you made with NFTs is a very good example, because the questions we were getting from clients was where if I buy an NFT of an image, can I use that image? And sometimes the answer was no, because the license terms underlying that NFT wouldn't allow you to use that image even to make a shirt or for marketing purposes. You could just use that NFT as a collectible to trade it, and that led honestly even to some frauds, because you had that maybe frauds were the result of a misunderstanding of what you were buying. So I believe that now there is more culture around blockchain. So